Let's extend the time scales of things, or at least bring in the human aspects to these things. When we look at this time scale of 400 million years before present, we are talking about evolution of photosynthesis, vascular plants, impacts on carbon, and then natural variability and so on. There are specific inventions life made along the way of, for example, splitting water to get electrons to reduce carbon so it could produce carbohydrates by photosynthesis, CO2 plus H2O, CH2O plus oxygen, and so on. But the carbon in this context has also produced radiation imbalance, so there is a forcing added by CO2. On the long time scales, we obviously have to consider solar changes as well. So there are those radiative forcings corresponding to the CO2 that we are talking about. So remember, when we go this far back, sun was much less brighter, well, at least less brighter. And then we are talking again about coming here to the present, where our baseline of 0 occurs, and then we are looking at the future and what our CO2 emissions are going to do in terms of radiative perturbations, top of the atmosphere radiative imbalance in terms of incoming shortwave and outgoing long wave, which is the greenhouse gas effect of the greenhouse gases that we are worried about, right? So obviously, again, we are going to go, if we continue with business as usual, we're going to go way above anything we have seen in the last 400 million years. So that is definitely something to worry about, because we haven't been around but for the last 10,000 years as modern human beings, and last couple of million years as our ancestors. So what have we done in the Holocene? This is Bill Rudiman's ideas about how Anthropocene, or the anthropogenic effect, started right with the beginning of the agriculture. So he looks at the solar radiation in terms of watts per meter squared, starting here at about 11,000 years ago, at the end of that's less than 11,000, but let's say 10,000, right at the end of the last ice age, Younger Dryas, and then let's say beginning of the agricultural way of life. So solar radiation and the natural methane trend is down here, and the estimated methane from various evidences shown here in ppb is been perturbed by humans since about 5,000 years ago, mainly related to draining wetlands, deforestation, rice cultivation, and so on and so forth. So observed methane has gone up, and it has now reached close to 18 or 1900 parts per billion. And similarly, CO2, if you look at expected natural CO2 trend, would be in this direction, because we were coming out of the last ice age and should be headed, based on solar radiation estimates, into the next slowly towards the next ice age, even though that would depend on ellipticity, which is more circular at this time. But in general, the deglaciations in the Pleistocene have lasted around 10 to 12,000 years, which is already the time. But observed CO2 has gone up over this time, and the argument by Rudiman is that this is already directly related to human activities, but not everybody agrees with it. And if we look at temperatures, we started with coming out of the ice age, and over the very long time scales, we should have been heading in this direction. Natural solar radiation and greenhouse gas trend should have brought us here, and there is the glaciation threshold, which we crossed around 4,500, 4,200 years or so ago. But the observed climate has been heading in this direction, and we have remained way above the glaciation threshold, again because of these methane and CO2 increases because of human activities. He gets into other details, looking at spikes and so on in the last couple of thousand years, looking at AD here. The dips and rises in CO2 are explained in terms of local epidemics and their impact on abandoning, let's say, agriculture, recovery of forests, drawdown of carbon, so decrease in carbon here, regional epidemics which kill large number of people and reduce agricultural activities and other land use activities, and black plague and other diseases that have hit over time. So you can see there is two data sources here, the Taylor Dome and Law Dome. He's combining the two. So this is essentially an interpretation, and not everybody completely agrees that these are necessarily related to human activities. Not so easy to attribute those changes specifically to human activities. Anyway, this hypothesis is still out there. Can we go back further and see what interactions of humans, carbon and climate has been? So let's go back to 5 million years ago. If we go to the Pliocene-Pleistocene boundaries from about 3 million years beyond into 5 million years, the oldest relatives of ours, like Ardipithecus ramidus in Ethiopia, everything started in East Africa as we know, goes here, and the Ardipithecus anamensis in Kenya. This is Lucy, so we begin to find unshaped tools. Australopithecus afarensis in Ethiopia, Kenya and Tanzania leave evidences here, and we can come forward in time to more recent, where the split happens and then this lineage survived for a while, more than 1 million years or so. So Paranthropus ethiopicus, Paranthropus bolsei and Paranthropus robustus in South Africa and so on. And the idea is that this is where the Pliocene ended, and there are other details. The rainfall over East Africa changed considerably. As we will see in a minute, vegetation over East Africa changed considerably. It used to be green, lush vegetation and went into savannas and grasslands. So the distance which animals had to move, our ancestors had to move to run from predators, to hide, to find food and so on, increased in this landscape. And the idea is that climate directly or indirectly or predominantly affected the evolution of our lineage. So Australopithecus africanus is still here, and here we go into the Homo lineage here. So this is where the Oldowan tools are found, which corresponds to some skills in terms of opposable thumbs and so on. So some evolution is happening along the way, as we will see in a minute. And then you have Homo habilis and Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, which is known as the handyman, and we have the Neanderthals up here, who disappeared really recently, something like 26,000 years ago, and bred with the our ancestors, Homo heidelbergensis, and then we have Homo sapiens here, and now we survive, and all these have disappeared. So there are lots of ideas about how the interbreeding happened, how brain evolved, how language evolved, how skills evolved, how interbreeding happened, and so on and so forth. But we are mostly interested in trying to relate it to climate, so I will do that in the next podcast. But the main message is that the evolution of climate, natural variability, the change in the Pacific El Nino-like condition. Basically, it's the east-west sea-surface temperature gradient in the Pacific, which directly affects the rainfall over East Africa, changed, and it's been blamed on the movement of Australia northward, blocking the pathway between Pacific and the Indian Oceans and changing rainfall patterns and changing the El Nino timescale, going from a flat gradient in the Pacific to a gradient that is now cold in the east, warm in the west, and changes every few years because of El Nino, and so on and so forth. So if there is a direct impact on evolution of human beings, direct impact of climate on the evolution of human beings, then what are we trying to do now? Are we trying to stop climate change? Are we trying to affect other species, ourselves, and so on and so forth? Even over a long time scale, even the so-called extinction events actually have led to newer species. So the biodiversity in terms of number of families of species of life have increased over time, because each time there is a mass extinction, new niches open up, new species evolve to take up the environmental windows that open up, and so on and so forth. Obviously, human activities are affecting a lot of species, and a lot of species are going extinct, are expected to continue to go extinct. But what is the time scale over which our impact would appear in terms of the actual biodiversity change? And what will happen to ourselves in this whole perturbation that we are making? Those are the key questions, but we have to keep coming back to geoengineering, which is the main topic, to say what are the perturbations to the carbon cycle and what do they mean in the context of geoengineering. Okay.